we'll see how this goes. Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Katrina Crouch. I'm the fine artist and educator behind this YouTube channel where I am just super passionate about teaching the why behind the how and really equipping you so that you're able to create artwork on your own. I don't really want to create a bunch of mini Katrinas. There's already one here. We don't need any more. But I am super excited today to be joined by my friend Khrystyna. She is a fellow fine artist, a boy mama, which I also love. And today we're going to be talking about printing artwork from home. And as fine artists, it's really important to make sure that you have the good quality, but we're also, if we're kind of making our own business, it can be intimidating to know where to spend the money, where to splurge. And Khrystyna is going to share with us today some of her tips on that process. She has been printing from home and working as a fine artist for over 4 years and has really established a good rhythm. So I'm excited to have her on with us. Thank you so much for coming. So I'll let you take it away.
A little intro.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, friends. My name is Khrystyna, and as Katrina said, I'm a fine artist. I'm also starting going a little digital lately, but I work in a variety of medias, from inks to oils, and for the past 3 years, I've been running a small Etsy shop, and all of it happens right here in my studio. Here's a printer. And over the years, I've kind of collected some tips and tricks that I've been sharing because I've been receiving a lot of questions on Instagram, and I'm always happy to answer them there. But I'm happy to have a chance to finally dive in a little bit more into the details of printing from home, because it's not that hard as you're going to see.
Yeah, she has a great Instagram, and she also has a YouTube channel, which I'll have linked in the description. If it's not there now, I'm not sure how it works when you're going live. If it's not there now, it will be live as soon as possible afterwards. I'll have her YouTube as well as her Instagram linked down below. But also great resources. She's always sharing things from framing and printing tips, and it really shares kind of some of my passion for teaching you guys. So, we've got some questions. We have Hannah. Hello. Oh, not questions, just comments. Hello, excited to hear your advice and tips, and getting just lots of love. So why don't you go ahead and get started, and I will write down any questions that pop in.
Okay, so for today's session, I kind of picked out the few questions that I get the most about printing. And one question that I also get even on Etsy is, what is the fine art print itself? Why does it call fine art print? Why does it cost more than a usual print? And the fine art print goes by the same name as a giclée print. It's just a fancy word for printing. It's not really anything that complicated. But the fine art print has 4 main criteria that qualify it to be called a high quality print. And I'm going to go into 2 of them into more details. I'm going to brush over the 2 other ones, and you will see why. So the 4 criteria are the good image quality that you print from, the good archival paper, acid-free paper, and the final 2 ones are the printer and the inks. And these 2 go together because the printer that I'm using is the Canon Pixma, right there, is the Canon Pixma Pro 100. This printer is dye-based. And I'm gonna go into details in a little bit. There are printers that are also pigment-based. And the printer and the ink go together because you cannot put pigment-based inks into dye-based printer. It will clog the printer and it's just gonna ruin it. Now, there is a debate online, I mean, everywhere, not just online, on the quality of the pigment inks versus the dye-based ink. And now the manufacturers went up to the point where the dye-base really can last as long as a pigment. It is not an issue anymore, as long as you are using the genuine inks that have their quality stamps. Right there. If I can show it. Because even though they are easily refillable, and it's something that I used to do in college and in high school, I would just fill them up with the syringe. This is not going to work with the fine art printing. If you want your customers to have a good experience and a nice quality that's going to last, you have to go with the original inks. And
no
the
splurging on the cheap off-brand for the inks.
no, it's something that's going to show up really fast. I've seen artists saying that they use the third brand inks and they just faded in a couple of years. So you can't risk that. And now that people can leave reviews and go back to your shop, go back to their orders, you don't want to risk that when they're going to be coming back and just telling you that, well, you promised me this and I paid so much money and that's now it's ruined. So the printer that I got is the dye based. So I'm buying the dye based inks. And when I got it in 2018, this printer was $360. It is now discontinued, so it doubled in price. So that's why I'm not really recommending this one. It makes more sense to go for the more advanced ones if you can really invest into this one. And now they're actually going hand in hand with the other one. So the pigment base is kind of the same quality and kind of the same price, but their newest pigment-based printer can print up to 17 by 22 inches. Mine is limited to 13 by 19 inches. And honestly, I've never even used that size. I mostly print 8 by 10s, 11 by 14 probably the largest. So this is just the regular size, 8 by 10. I do print 12 by 12s for some of the square ones. But if you think that you're going to be mostly producing smaller works, then it doesn't make sense to pay extra to get the large, huge size printer. Because this one already, if I can show this, if you're familiar with the IKEA Alex drawers, the wider ones, it takes up the space of the entire drawer.
Oh, wow.
So this is at least a size and a half of the usual office printer. So there are also Epson printers. They're basically the same, but printers and inks is just something that you can basically afford. They're all a good quality now. So it just comes down to also the inks, how much inks are going to cost. For my printer, the inks cost $125 for the set of 8 inks. And another thing is that to be also called a fine art printer, they have to be able to print with at least 8 inks, from 8 to 12. And you get the same magenta and cyan and yellow colors, but you get the doubles of each. So you get one is a pastel magenta and one is a regular magenta. You get a pastel cyan and you get regular cyan. So with that, you're able to print all of the subtle details and all of the transitions between colors. And it's something that you're not going to be able to achieve with the office printer. So this is one of the questions that I get. People asking, can I really do this with my own office printer? And I'm just saying, no, you can't get it. You're going to see it. And especially if you're doing oil prints like I'm doing from some of my oil paintings, it's with something where you want to see all of the transitions of colors.
And then not be
I'm
blocks
going to
of
achieve this
color.
subtle. I'm going to take this out. I'm going to put on my fancy gloves and I'm going to take it out. So this is one of probably the biggest spending is the printer and the inks, just because you can't go around it. You can't really match the quality with the office printer. Oops, let me take it out.
While you get that out, I'm going to just kind of reiterate one of the big questions that I've been getting is, which printer do you recommend? I do recommend, if you're researching, a good place to start is the Canon Pixma 100, and just kind of start there and research from there. Epson is another wonderful brand that I have used for years, and that's a great place to start. And Khrystyna already mentioned, like, if you're looking specifically for something that will print artwork, and you want that quality, start with 8 inks. I've seen some that are 6, and you can get you can get good quality there. But while you're researching, these are just things to look for. Like we could recommend a specific printer, but in a year or two, that could be discontinued, that could be unavailable, or there might be something better out there. So the thing that you really want to research is, obviously read reviews, but you want to look for those certain qualities. And one thing that I didn't know that you mentioned, Khrystyna, was that the two different styles of the ink with the dye and the pigments, that those are pretty much the same now. So it's really nice to know that the quality of technology is kind of catching up, and that's not something you have to worry about anymore, where, one day you walk into a room and the print that you printed a little while ago is faded. That shouldn't be a problem, and it looks like it's no longer causing any issues, which is great.
Well, there's still the pigment-based ink, they're promised to last up to a couple 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think anybody is going to hold on to a print for 200 years.
I haven't personally tested any of them.
I'm not going to live long enough.
Yes.
So here's just to show the example of the subtlety in transitions from the darker colors. Of course, we're in the mercy of our internet connection, but just the transitions from the darker to the lighter ones and all of the in-between values in there, you're just not going to be able to achieve that with the regular office printer. And it's going to show, and it's not just you, the artist yourself, because we get the biggest kind of eye. We see all the smallest details, but it's even going to be visible to your customers too. So this is something that is an investment, and it's a long-term investment. And I just recommend maybe wait a little more if you're not able to purchase it now, but rather buy the good stuff and invest and feel safe that this is going to last you for years and years and years, and that this is going to produce a good quality print, rather than buying out the cheapest version, because then it just doesn't even make sense, in my opinion. But of course.
And that's something, especially if you're selling your artwork, that you kind of put on, I don't want to say like put it onto the customer, but it's something that if your inks are more expensive, if your printer is more expensive, if your papers are more expensive, you need to charge more. And so you need to kind of take care of that as the artist. It should not mean, it's not going to mean that your art prints are $300, just costs. But it does mean that you can't necessarily sell a print for $10 and make any money. So it's something to think about, something to look at. And if you're taking your business seriously, having that investment and that time to research isn't a bad thing.
Yes, and I would say that at-home printing is definitely a better option for somebody with a smaller run of sales. I'm not selling hundreds of prints a day, so I don't really need to outsource, because outsourcing would probably be cheaper. You can get, if you buy in a bulk of hundreds of versions of prints, that'll be definitely cheaper. For myself, I know that I would rather value a variety of prints and a variety of sizes. So it's something that I can do on demand. I don't have to worry, how many copies do I order, how many gonna sell, what is the most popular size, because I can print on demand. And I'll go into this in a little detail. Printing on demand means I can buy the supplies and I don't have to waste them. I can print as I go. Whatever orders I get, I can use the supplies on those orders. So I don't have to calculate in ahead, or what is the most popular thing right now? What was the most popular print? What is the most popular size? I can just list it on Etsy and see what people like and what people don't like. And I have prints that never sold. They're still hanging in there. And, every customer is waiting for their products. Maybe somebody will find them. But I definitely have prints that are selling one after another one. So I know that I can print a little bit of head, like I can make extra prints of those, so just easier to ship. But just judging from the size of my studio, like I can reach both walls with my hands. So I know I'm short on size. I don't have that much space to source so many supplies. So this was definitely the options for me. If you're somebody who knows you have a huge audience and the stuff is going to be selling out, and if you do want to try outsourcing, by all means, it is going to be cheaper. But if you're starting out small, if you're not sure, And also, this is a way to start because the sales will pick up eventually. But if you don't know what exactly is going to be most popular, then you can just test it out at home and see how it goes. And honestly, the quality is going to be the same because the industrial printers, they're just using the larger sizes and they're just using the larger size of paper that they later cut down. But these are basically the same inks and the same printers.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not really sacrificing the quality if you're printing from home. Okay, are we getting any more questions about this, or I'm gonna jump into the image and paper?
Well, those are the questions that we're getting, so I figured we'd just wait and
So
answer them.
the two main criteria of the fine art print is the good quality image and the good quality paper. So the image, I would say, is even most important because this is what everything starts from. And if you're working small format, if you're working on 8 by 10, 11 by 14, your best option is a scanner. You can't beat the quality of the scanner because you will get the crispness of the details. You can set up all of the settings and your resolution as you're scanning it. And my rule of thumb is that the smaller your artwork is, the larger the resolution is supposed to be. So usually the minimum resolution for a good print is 300 ppi, but that's the minimum. I usually go with 600 and higher because you never know when a client might want to ask you, oh, can you print actually larger? Or I actually had requests when somebody asked me to order it from another image printing company, a larger print. And I was able to do that because even though the original sold, my file that I saved was in very good resolution, so I can blow it up to a big size and it was no problem.
Mm-hmm.
But another thing is that I like to draw in a small format, and I'm going to let you in on a little secret. I promise not to tell anybody. So one of my popular artworks is you're going to see the print of the acorn in the back.
Mm-hmm.
It is an 8 by 10. The original acorn was 3 inches. But I scanned it, and I'm going to bring the print. I scanned it at 1200 ppi resolution, and you would not tell how small it was by looking at the quality of the print. Because I have all of my details. Of course, it's harder to see on the camera, but I have all of my details preserved, and I can even go higher from this file. Mm-hmm. But there is a trick to this. So when you scan your artwork and when you save it at first, save that file separately, because something I didn't know before is that every time you open and close and open and close the file to print, it reduces the quality of the file. And if you go in Photoshop into the image size, it's going to show you the resolution. It's going to be dropping by like 10th or 100th, but it's going to be gradually dropping. So when you scan your print, your artwork, you have to save it into a file and occasionally make a copy of that file and then print from it, because that has to stay sort of untouchable. Mm-hmm. And
I just have a folder with my artwork that's just, I have it as like raw images, and that's where everything lives, so that I can go back and I have it as, that high scanned DPI. I also recommend starting at 600 if you're working with artwork. And just like she was saying, you open it again, work from it, and kind of move on, because slowly, I'm not really sure why they do that to us, but that's what the programs do. So.
Yes, and another thing is, even if you're working with larger works, or if you made artwork that it's double your usual size, still scan it in portions. You don't have to cut it. Please don't cut your artworks. But you can scan. It's something I've done before. I would just scan it as much as I could scan in portions, and I would join it in Photoshop, and it would still much better quality than of a photograph. And I even I even scan my oil paintings because I work small format even in oils. So this one, for example, the original was, I believe, 5 by 5 inches because it sold a long time ago, but I scanned it and the print is now 10 by 10 inches. I
Mm-hmm.
also sell 12 by 12. And if I bring it closer, you can still see all of the brushwork
Mm-hmm.
and all of the details. And it's something that customers really value in the fine work, I mean, fine art print work, is that even on the paper that doesn't have any texture, like this is a regular luster paper. This is not a canvas print, but you will be able, keep going backwards. You will be able to see the texture of the canvas in there.
Mm-hmm.
This was because this was also scanned. So use and abuse your scanner as much as you can scan. But if you're working on larger oil paintings, you will need to either ask a professional photographer that has a good camera and
Mm-hmm.
knows how to use a good lighting, or you would have to rent a camera. This is an option too. They're actually pretty cheap to rent nowadays, and go outside. And even if it's a cloudy day, it's still better to take a picture outside than inside
Mm-hmm.
to get an even lighting, because everything starts with your original image. If you have a crappy image, you're not going to get a good print out of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the reality of it. One question also I get, people get confused by the PPI and the DPI. So the PPI is the pixel per inch. It's the resolution at which you scan your artwork. The DPI is the resolution of the printer. It's basically how well your printer can print and how many dots per inch it can fit into the artwork. So these two are absolutely different because they belong to different programs. One is handled by printer, one's handled by the image processing. So not to confuse the two, the DPI belongs to the printer.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any questions about the
It
images
says,
or? Okay.
let's see. Do we need an expensive scanner, or can you use your computer scanner? I'll let you answer and then I'll give my 2 cents.
If your scanner is able to go to at least, I would say, 2000 PPI, then you're good. Because I think the highest I scanned my prints was probably 1200 PPI. I never needed more. I have a separate scanner, which is the Epson Perfection V550. This is just the standalone scanner because my office printer is acting up. It's kind of old guy. I couldn't trust him anymore. So I decided to buy, but these even standalone scanners, they're not that expensive anymore. And their resolution goes up to 4800 or something, I don't remember. If I probably scanned it at the largest resolution, it would crash my computer. So there is no, I'm just saying that because there is no point in it. If you can get your basic needs met by your office scanner, then it's more than fine.
And I would agree with that. So I would say if you have an office scanner, especially if you're just starting out, stick with that for a while. You'll get to a point where you'll notice, you know what, I want higher quality, whether it's you're printing larger items or it just kind of depends on what you're creating with your scans. Make sure that it goes to a minimum of 600. And then, yeah, I would agree that that's one place where I would not necessarily splurge. So I've been doing art for a long time. I haven't used a standalone alone scanner in a long time because my office printer one is right there next to my computer. And so that tends to be easier, even with it's something I'm working on that's large scale. And I think, oh, I'd rather use the large scale scanner. I usually just end up using photo merge in Photoshop. So if you're going to, if you're looking for areas to kind of splurge or save, that's where I would save. At least for now, like I said, you'll get to a point where you'll notice, okay, I need something that's a little, higher end or is larger, or I just need more content for my pieces, then you can kind of invest. And again, I only used Epson scanners, and I've had, except for my office printer. But I've had really good success with those.
And also, sometimes you can play with the settings in your scanner because usually the printer software comes with the scanner software in it. So you can just play a little bit with the settings because they would be usually just spiked up to the high contrast and high saturation to kind of deliver you a nice image. But you for yourself to match the better quality of kind of the original copy, you're better off playing with those settings in the Photoshop. So you can just set all of the settings in the scanner software to the basic ones and then just play with them in the Photoshop because the Photoshop will deliver much better image processing quality.
All right, sounds good. So scanner, it's important to get that good quality image. That's what it's, you're not going to have a good quality print without a good quality image, but thankfully we're able to get that with a lot of different things. Let's move on to paper type.
This is my most exciting. I am just upset about the printer papers I am about the fine art paper. So you'll have to stop me if I go on for too long. So luckily, most manufacturers that produce the fine art printing paper sell sample packs. And this was a lifesaver for me because once you Google, there are hundreds of options and they're not cheap. The pack I will show you. This is the paper that I use for my prints. This is Moab and Trada. And I know this brand because I used them very long time ago when I was in college doing darkroom photography. Their paper is the paper I printed on. So since then, I just knew the brand and I really trusted it. But a pack of, how many is it? 25 sheets usually goes for around $35, $37. So before you're able to commit to a single kind of paper that you like, most brands sell sample packs. And sample packs, this one, for example, has 15 different kinds of paper. And there are different sample packs for different needs. So, for example, the Honey Muley one, this is another good quality paper. They have different sample packs for photo paper, the glossy ones, or the matte or the luster ones, or the fine art matte papers. So look into these ones too. So this is definitely a good way to start it first, because once you're going to be playing around with paper, you will notice that there are a lot of differences, not just in the textures, but also in the colors of the paper. So this is something you will have to consider for yourself, what kind of artwork you're producing and what kind of outlook do you want to get from your print. So for example, I work in a variety of media. I work from fine ink illustrations to pencils, to color pencils, to watercolors. So I wanted to commit to one kind of paper that I would know would be able to handle all of those mediums. So what I did, and I'll show you a little trick that you can do for yourself too, is when you order your sample box of paper, put a collage of all of the works that you're thinking you're going to be printing or all the different mediums into a Photoshop file. So here, for example, I have my acorn. So I have my pencil, I have my inks, I have my color pencils, I have my watercolors, I have my gouaches, and I have my oils, all in the same file. And I printed these across a lot of different types of paper. And I was able to compare how that paper is handling those images. And even if you don't think you're going to be printing all of the prints at first, it is easier for me to now go back to these samples and see how each kind of paper handled each kind of the medium. Because I've decided to go with the whitest white for my prints. Oh, another thing, all of the settings that you play with printing, write them down because you're not going to remember them. And now I'm able to go back and kind of consider what the new style of print is going to look like on that paper, because the paper that I went with is Moab Entrada Reg Bright 300. The 300 stands for 300 GSM. So this is basically the thickness of the watercolor paper, but it barely has any texture on it. You're probably not going to be able to see that. There's a very, very slightest just papery texture. And with this paper, you can print on both sides. Something you might not going to need for finer printing, but when you're just trying out, when you're testing out, I would print small images, like test strips of just different colors and stuff, just until I figure out all of the settings. And I'll use both sides for my prints. And another good thing about going with the wider paper for your printing paper is that I once received a request from a customer. She was collecting the prints for her nursery that she was putting together for her daughter, and she wanted them to have very specific tint. So most of my prints, they kind of go with the little bit of a lavender grayish tint on the paper, if you can see the difference. She wanted the change to kind of the warmer oatmeal linen tint. And I was able to do that in Photoshop because I can handle all of these subtleties in Photoshop, and I don't have to play around with the paper too much, printing and wasting ink, because I will know exactly how that paper is going to handle that ink. So if you want to go for a more vintage style, if you think that this is going to be the waste of ink to put down the background, that's how the sample packs come in handy, because you can test out how exactly it's going to look on a different color of the paper. So it might work for someone, but I decided that the colors just looked way more vibrant. For example, for the watercolors, it just looks exactly as the colors that I printed there. And matte paper is, of course, not going to cover all of the mediums. So for oil prints, I had to go with the photo paper. And when I was ordering, this is something that happened by accident, but when I was ordering my Canon printer, they were running a sale on the Canon Pro Luster paper. And I was actually going to make glossy prints for my oils, but when I tried luster, was very subtle sheen on it, kind of very satin, if you can see that. This was the selling point for me because I was able to get the depth of the darker colors without having to be too glossy and too reflective. And don't do what I do, don't handle your prints with your hands. This was kind of a misprint that I can do this now, but don't handle, your prints with your hands. So be prepared that you have to get a variety of papers for different purposes. I was able to make my watercolor prints work well on the same paper that I use for my ink prints, but it all depends with the kind of artwork that you're producing. You will have to go with what works for your details best. And as a rule of thumb, I would say the name that you know, that you hear the most, is probably the best kind of paper. So if it's someone that you've never heard of before, might not be a good option. When you Google it, I know there's so many options, but I like to go with just the brands that I've heard of, that I know other people are using. So something like Canon or Moab or Honeymule, they're a little more expensive, but I can feel safe that the quality is really going to stand up to the price. And if I'm charging a little bit more for the print, I can be sure that the paper is really going to last quite a long time. And another thing to remember here is that even though the fine art paper is always acid-free, it is not acid-resistant. So once you make your print, don't think that it's going to last you for hundreds of years, because if you do a mistake like me and you put it in the folder, it's kind of yellow. And my print's yellowed.
Oh.
So my samples yellowed in there. I mean, I'm not going to be selling them. This is for my own reference, but this is something to remember that once you print something, you have to protect it. So one of the things that I use is the photo sleeves that have to be acid free. Also, if you gonna be, well, this will be something for a different video, but if you're running an Etsy shop and if you're thinking about sending your prints to your customers, think about how you're packaging them. Unfortunately, I've seen some other artists that would make a really nice print, but they would wrap it in a regular tissue paper, and I just cringed like, you just ruined all of your hard work and all of your money you spent on the paper, because the paper will absorb acid from everything that it touches. So what I recommend is something that we probably all have. It's just the regular tracing paper. If it says that it's acid-free tracing paper, just layer this paper between your prints or wrap your prints into this tracing paper. And you can put your stickers, your, I don't know, logo stamps on top of it to personalize it and make it nice and pretty. But at least you will be sure that this is going to last you a longer time. Another thing that's important for storage is considering using portfolio folders that will secure your prints from the light too, because even if you're storing it for a short time before you ship them out, if you can protect them for a little longer from being exposed to the light, that's only a plus for you and your prints. And I also get a question asking me, if my watercolor paper that I paint on is acid free, can I print on it? No, it has to be the specific type of paper, because if you're ever try like me, just see what this paper is made of. It's actually made of layers of the papers that are saturated with special chemicals that use to absorb the ink and kind of conserve the ink inside of the paper. So you will see that this is not the regular paper you paint on or draw on. It has to be made specifically for the printers. And the paper is only half the problem. I mean, not the problem, but you also will have to download the Icc profiles, which will be available either on the paper manufacturer website or the printer manufacturer website. A little difference that I noticed is that the same Icc printing profiles that I downloaded from the Canon website were more accurate than the ones I downloaded from the paper manufacturer website. I'm not sure why. Maybe they've corrected this mistake now, because that was years ago. But I just noticed a slightly more accurate results from the ones coming from the Canon. And if you're using lots of paper, I mean, if you go to the Canon websites, they're going to give you a zip file with maybe hundreds of these profiles. You're going to be using maybe one or two of them. But everything that you have to do with them is just when you're printing from the Photoshop window, and this is also another thing I'll get into detail later. When you're printing it, all you have to do is click on the specific profile for the paper and send the paper to print. Because what that profile does, it tells your printer exactly how that paper is going to absorb ink or handle ink. What is the color of the paper? So if you're using, for example, the yellower kind of paper with the vintage look, the printer has to manage the colors differently to kind of deliver the colors that you want them to be closer to the original artwork.
Yeah, in so many ways, our printers are painting. And
Yeah.
so they need to know what the profile is and how to accept that and just kind of how to adjust accordingly. So if you already had yellow paint on your palette, that would change how you were going to mix something, especially if it was going to be, a cooler tone. And that would, you'd want to adjust that to get the most accurate response. Sorry to cut you off there. I just don't want us to take too long. I know that you're really passionate about this. Just kind of to summarize, I know a lot of people have had some questions about papers. Could you reiterate of your two favorite brands, since that's kind of a great place to start, and to purchase sample packs from, because if you are going for like that vintage vibe and you kind of want that aesthetic, having the tinted paper might be awesome for you. But if you get it, it might not be the right tint, quite what you're going for. It'd be better to just kind of sacrifice a sample than to sacrifice a whole package of paper, although you could probably return it. But could you kind of reiterate your brands again that you were really liking and the finishes?
So the two main paper textures that I settled on is the Moab Entrado Reg Bright 300. This also comes in the 190 GSM, with a little thinner kind of paper. I just like them to feel sturdy and a little more solid on its own. It just gives a little bit more of the fine art feel to the paper. So I just went with the 300. The price difference between the 300 and 190 is not that big anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So this mine is the main one that I use for the pencil artworks, the color pencil artworks, and the inks. And I use two sizes. I use 8.5 by 11, and I use 11 by 17. This is just the size they come in, and there's also size 13 by 19. I've never used that size of paper for my matte prints just because I never really had a request for such a large artwork. The largest that I offer is 11 by 14. So I don't need anything larger than that. And for my oil prints, I had to get out the big guy. So this one is this 13 by 19. This is Canon Pro Luster. And I really prefer this one over the glossy ones just because probably somebody who orders your print, they're still going to be putting it under the glass. So it's still going to add that layer of reflection to it. So if you can subdue that reflection just a little bit, for me, it adds a little nicer quality other than just a photo paper print. So these are the two that I settled on, and this is really also the way to save yourself some money, so you're not investing into too many different kinds of papers and you're jumping from one to another one. You can pick one and you stick to it. And even when I buy larger pieces, I sometimes put smaller prints on it just to see in the Photoshop how I can play around with them, and you can get more prints out of it that way. But even if a sample pack will have, I don't know, was it 15 different kinds of paper, you're probably not gonna even try all of them. But it still saves a little bit of money to play around with the samples at first before you're settled on one or two, the final ones.
And I thought that was a great tip too, as you're testing out the paper or you know that you want to print a bunch of different styles, is to have those smaller and just print that on one sheet of paper. One thing I will add is if you decide that something's just not printing right and you need to adjust it, I highly recommend printing your file or adjusting your file. So like going to Photoshop and adjusting the colors there. First, if it's not printing right, check and make sure that you're in CMYK mode and not RGB, which is more for screens. Make sure that you're editing the file and not the printer, because if you kind of tweaking the printer and adjusting that, I know a bunch of people have said like, oh, I gotta like tweak my printer. That could really throw some things off, and it's almost like putting paint directly onto your paintbrush instead of onto the palette. It's going to make it harder. It might mess up, the quality of the brush as well. So I think that was a great tip, is kind of adding that in there with, if you're, you have those little kind of thumbnails that you've printed off, write down what you did, but make sure that it's on the files and not, something that you're doing to your printer.
Another detail I wanted to add is that if you don't have a Photoshop, consider getting at least their cloud version or any kind of version of Photoshop, because it's just capable of so many more settings adjustments that will be very fine and very small, but very crucial to the quality of the print. And the regular software that comes with any kind of printer is just not capable of handling all of the profiles of the printer or all the profiles of that paper. And in Photoshop, it's not just all of the fidgeting you can do with a print specifically, it's how that file is sent to the printer is also important, because the Photoshop knows that this has to be a good quality and has to take care of the things, and it will treat all of these profiles, put them in place, and put all of it together so that your print comes out the way it's supposed to be. Because the regular printers, the Canon software or any kind of Apple software, whatever you do for your like office printing, is not going to be able to handle all of these fine details for the printing. So it has to be done either through Lightroom or Photoshop. And both of them actually capable of giving you a preview of what the print is going to look like. So when you're selecting your all of the small details, your profile, whether you use a black point compensation, which is something that you have to use for matte prints, you just tell the Photoshop to consider your blacks as the blackest black.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of adjust all this. If we have some time, I can open the Photoshop later and show all those little things, or we can save it for another video. But for the finer print, I highly recommend using it Photoshop or Lightroom, because they'll just be able to handle all of these details. And it sounds complicated, but once you do it once or twice, it's actually going to be very easy, and it just basically a few clicks. That it's
Mm-hmm.
not even that hard. I know a lot of people put their own profiles together for printing. Somebody who has a lot of time can probably play around with that, but I found the usual profiles and Photoshop settings just work fine for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't have to build any of my own files on top of that.
Yeah, I also recommend getting Photoshop if you're, I mean, if you're really working in, you're planning to do a lot of art prints. I think that Photoshop, there really isn't another program. Lightroom is kind of close, but it's really designed for photography. There's not really another program like it. I did receive a question on Instagram when I asked for questions for this about whether or not we could use Procreate to kind of edit illustrations and stuff like that. And I mean, obviously you would hope that the file that you've created would automatically print the way that you want it to. Opening something in like Preview or just on your program, it won't necessarily give you the effect that you want. You could do a lot of back and forth, but it's a lot easier with Photoshop. Not impossible to do it with other programs, but yeah, it is a lot easier. If you've been on the fence, but you're really like, okay, I want to take this business seriously, or I'm really ready to just have, just I guess to do it right and do it professionally, it's time to invest in Photoshop. You can totally pull yourself up by your bootstraps and kind of fake it, if you will. And I've been there with, like I said, I've used my office scanner all the time, and there are just ways that you can get around things. But if you want to make those quality prints, you're going to invest in a printer that does the printer and the inks and the paper, then go ahead and invest in Photoshop. That's going to be your right-hand man. It's going to be the tool that will help you get these two to communicate, because really that's the thing, is you're communicating between the printer and the paper and making sure that that connection is seamless. And even though you'll probably, at least in my experience for my printing, usually my first print, I have to like tweak the colors or do something to get it to turn out exactly the way I want it to. It's so much faster if you're working with a program that's literally designed to do this for you.
And you can even cheat a little bit with the Photoshop. I've done it before, when you have to clean up something when your line went off a
Oh,
little
yes.
bit, or you think, oh, this is not dark enough. I actually want to add a little bit more darkness to my pencil sketch or something. You can do all that in Photoshop and see how it looks in print, because something that is easier, more natural for you to know how it's going to look on the paper, it's not going to necessarily look the same on the print. So just fidgeting a little bit with your print in Photoshop doesn't really hurt, and it does not reduce the quality by any means. Once you're in Photoshop, you can feel safe that whatever you do, unless you change the image quality, anything that you add to it is not going to reduce the quality of the print. And you can do a little bit of cheating. There are cleanups, Oh, also one thing I also get asked a lot, do I erase the background from my illustrations when I print them? Sometimes I do. This is also a different topic, how to digitize prints, but sometimes I like to have a very clean background behind my prints. So what I'm printing is actually just my illustration and the background is artificially created. So I'm not copying any unwanted texture from the paper because it would look a little bit dirty. It would look like you have dust, even though that was just the creaks on in the texture
Hmm.
of the paper. But it
Especially on an
might
enlarged
make,
piece
yeah,
like you were showing. Mhm.
unnecessary noise.
Yeah, I'd say the same. It depends on like there are some pieces that you want that texture there. I do have a digitizing video, and you can see my whole step-by-step process. I talk you through the whole thing in real time. I will have that link down below. I'm going to wrap this up because we're at 15 minutes here. If you have any questions, go ahead, throw those in the comment section. And if we're not live anymore, we'll come back and we'll answer some questions. And you can follow her on YouTube, Khrystyna on YouTube, or on Instagram. Colleen asks, do you grab new gloves every time you handle your prints?
No, I grab new gloves whenever I see them developing lint because I wash them. Because I will be grabbing the gloves on the outside too with my hands, so I'm gonna be leaving oils on the outside too. So occasionally I just send them in the washer and they wear off. Like these are just regular cotton gloves, and I would just see the fibers breaking down a little bit, and they will be leaving dust behind. So that's when I throw them off. But these are actually very cheap. They're not expensive at all, and they come in pairs of 10 or 20, I think,
Mm-hmm.
for just a couple dollars. So it really pays to grab some extra. But no, I don't really throw them away after one use.
The goal is not to be princesses here. It's more to avoid the oils on your hands from getting onto your paper. Because even if your hands are clean, just those oils there can kind of mess some things up.
It's
Okay,
not just
another.
oils, it's also the prints. On the darker, I don't know if this is kind of the old paper, you're not going to see it as much. But if you're using the photo paper, especially the glossy or the luster, and if you just leave your print in there, you're gonna see all of the outline of your prints in there.
Mhm.
So it's not just the oils, but the prints themselves. They're gonna stay there on, especially the darker prints.
Diana says, when you say dye-based ink, does that mean inkjet printer ink?
All of the pigment and dye base are inkjet printer because the inkjet meaning it's sprayed onto the paper rather than what's the other one? It's laser kind of adhered to the paper.
Mm-hmm.
So both dye base and pigment ones are going to be inkjet printers. But again, you cannot really substitute one ink for another. The printer has to be made for it. So even though it's inkjet, it has to be made for the pigment or for the dye. So even though it's inkjet, it's still a little bit different. But yes, they're all inkjet printers.
Yeah, inkjet more refers to the way that the ink is spread. Almost more of, yeah, the way, yeah, the process, but it doesn't change the
Yeah.
fact that the fuel, if you will, might be a little different. Okay, let's see. It looks like we are, oh, Diana says thank you. It looks like we've got the question. So I'm going to wrap us up now. Thank you again, Khrystyna, for hopping on with me. I know I had to, she's just a wealth of information on this. And I know I had to cut her off a couple of times just because it can be a little bit overwhelming.
I
But
can
thank
talk
you
for
so
days
much
about
for,
it.
thank you so much for jumping on live with me.
My pleasure.
And kind of sharing some of this knowledge with us. And I hope to have you back again at another date. So thank you guys. If you have not subscribed to either of our channels, go ahead and do that. Like I said, I'll have our YouTube channels as well as our Instagram links down below, and anything that we talked about, even some white gloves, I'll have those linked down below. And yeah, if you have any questions, go ahead, leave those in the comment section. We will both come back to this video and we will try and answer any questions that we have, whether it's something that, from our different perspectives. The great thing about art is that there's more than one right way to do things. Although it was nice that I thought we might like disagree on more, and it was kind of nice that we tended to agree on things. So, but yeah, you know, you have the current knowledge of two artists who have been experienced with printing. And so take advantage of it. Go ahead, ask those questions. And I'll see you guys next time. So happy drawing.
Thank you for having me. It was nice to see you all, guys.
Yeah.